Doing better with meetings, definitely better for teams, definitely good for organizations. But I think what individuals don't realize is that it will help you become more successful and advance more readily in your career.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leadership. I'll begin with a quote from humor columnist Dave Barry. Here's what he wrote. If you have ever seen the movie Night of the Living Dead, you have a rough idea of how modern meetings operate, with projects and proposals that everybody thought were killed, rising constantly from their graves to stagger back into meetings and eat the brains of the living. Now, that may have been written with tongue-in-cheek, but millions of meeting participants, or you might call them victims, would likely agree. Meetings of various formats consume untold chunks of our time and energy. In fact, an estimated 55 million meetings occur in the U.S. workplace every day. 55 million. One study shows that 90% of employees admit to daydreaming during meetings. In my own informal audit of American workers over the past 40 years, about 70% told me that they attend too many meetings. Now, I am not advocating the abolishment of meetings, but I do advocate the abolishment of bad meetings. My guest for this episode of Leadership certainly agrees. Dr. Stephen Rogelberg is a university professor and researcher who has devoted his career to analytics and data mining on the subject of meeting practices. He's been featured by CBS, CNN, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, in my Forbes column, and by many other national media outlets. Would you like to improve the quality of your meetings? A great resource is Stephen's best-selling book titled The Surprising Science of Meetings: How You Can Lead Your Team to Peak Performance. Stephen, welcome to Leadership.
Thank you so much. It is so good to be back with you, Roger. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, we're going to have fun. Now, it seems that most business people complain about the number and quality of their meetings, so why don't they do something about it?
Jeez, that is the question. That is the question. You know, it's blind spots. And there's just this assumption that bad meetings are the cost of doing business. And that's so far from the truth. And these blind spots are pervasive. So the blind spots are in our talent systems. If you look at various HR practices, there's no content on meetings. People aren't trained up on meetings. When you look at engagement surveys, there's no content on meetings. Like, how could that be, Roger? How could that be?
Right.
If people are in meetings all the time and engagement surveys are supposed to capture employee experience, we should have content on meetings. So there's just these blind spots all over the place. And I think it's just this belief, again, that bad meetings are the cost of doing business.
Well, according to your research, which is extensive, a lack of self-awareness is one reason that many leaders fail to run effective meetings. So what can they do to become more aware of what's working, what's not working, and how they can improve their meeting practices?
Yeah. And that's just another blind spot, right? So when you survey people coming out of a meeting, there is one person who said it was really good, and that's the meeting leader. They think it went really well, right? Because they have control, they have the power, and they're doing a ton of talking. So you do have this disconnect. So how can we bridge that gap of reality and their perception? Well, it goes back to what I mentioned previously around engagement surveys, right? So engagement survey processes are all about giving leaders feedback on the employee experience in their units. And so if we had content around meetings, we could start helping these leaders become aware. Now, without that, then really the best practice for leaders is to collect some information from their people.
Yes.
Ask your folks what's going well, not so well, and ideas for making our meetings better. And the thing that the leader needs to realize that by doing that, they become a hero, right? Because everyone is so frustrated with meetings. And if that leader positions themselves as part of the solution, right? If they say, hey, you know what? I hear you. I know we're all frustrated with meetings. I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to help solve this. So I'm going to give you this quick little questionnaire. Tell me what's working, not working, and ideas for improvement. And then let's learn, reflect, and try some new things. That isn't a compelling message.
For sure. It seems so simple, but as we know, most leaders don't do that.
They don't. And that's highly problematic, because what leaders don't realize is that actually running your meetings well can truly elevate your own personal career, right? If you're that person who's excellent at meetings, that means that you are working better with and through others, right? Which is critical to leadership. And it becomes a differentiator because we know so many leaders are terrible at this. So ultimately, doing better with meetings, definitely better for teams, definitely good for organizations. But I think what individuals don't realize is that it will help you become more successful and advance more readily in your career.
There's clearly a correlation. Now, you refer to agendas as a hollow crutch. What are some best practices in the use of a meeting agenda?
Yeah. So agendas are hollow crutch. I can't remember that was chapter 3 or 4, but that was one of a little more my controversial, cheeky chapter titles, because a lot of leaders think that by having an agenda, they're good.
Right.
They're good.
Right.
I did my job. And it's so silly to think that, right? Because what matters more than just having a piece of paper with topics on it is what those topics are. Are they truly compelling and worthy of conversation? And what matters even more is how you facilitate the conversation around those topics. That's the hard work, right? Having a piece of paper is the easy work. But with that said, Roger, I do have an innovation in agendas that I'd be happy to share. Are you curious?
Would it have to do with questions versus items?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a great idea. Tell us about that.
Thank you. And thank you for learning about it before. That's perfect. So, as I noted, agendas are typically framed as a set of topics to be discussed. And what I want to share as an alternative is framing your agenda as a set of questions to be answered. By framing your agenda as a set of questions to be answered, now you have to really stop and think, why am I having this meeting? It's to answer these questions. You have a better idea of who to invite. They're relevant to the questions. You have a better idea if the meeting has been successful. The question has been answered. And questions create an engaging challenge that draws people in. And now you know the punchline, Roger, so I'm just going to set you up. And if you just can't think of any questions, that likely means
don't have the meeting.
Exactly.
And nobody's going to complain.
Nobody's going
to say, golly, what happened to that Tuesday morning meeting? I don't know what to do with my time.
Yep.
Now, you recommend rotating the seating arrangement in meetings. Why? What does that accomplish?
Interesting. What the research clearly demonstrates is where people sit in a traditional meeting conference room affects communication flow. It affects who they disagree with and even who they agree with. Generally, the person next to us becomes the person we tend to agree with, and the person across from us tends to be a more focal person for conflict and disagreement. There's no magic place to sit in the table. However, I think what meeting leaders need to do is mix it up, right? So we have so many meetings, and yet people just keep sitting in the exact same places. Given that it affects those communication dynamics, the best practice is to change it up. Have people sit in different places at different meetings. This will make the meeting feel more fresh and can result in more and different types of communication.
Right. Well, I've been in meetings where some people never say a word, and I leave the meeting wondering, why were they here?
Yeah.
Somebody could have just sent them an email.
Yeah.
You talk about walking meetings. They seem to be popular in some organizations. What are the advantages and possible disadvantages of that approach?
Sure. So what I advocate in my work is the idea that leaders have lots of options. And none of these options, there's not necessarily one that's going to solve meetings, but there's options. And the best meeting leaders recognize that they can choose different options for different situations. So I never advocate that every meeting should be a walking meeting, but I certainly think some should be a walking meeting. Walking meetings are fantastic if the group is just, 2, 3, maybe 4 people. Walking meetings, besides being heart healthy, they actually can be disarming. When people aren't staring at each other, they're often more willing to disclose. There's data to suggest that people tend to be more creative in walking meetings and more comfortable. So that's a nice, viable option at times. Now, the caveats is it doesn't work with large groups. You can't have a herd of people and call that a meeting. That's not going to work. You also have to let people know in advance so they can wear the proper shoes. You actually have to think about the route. You need to have a backup plan in case it rains. And also you need to recognize that some people, depending on who they are and their health, might not want that. So you need to make sure that they have their voice in it. But if you can overcome those potential challenges, hey, it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, you get your steps in.
We get our steps.
Many people claim that they are good at multitasking, although decades of research shows that effective multitasking is no more than what some people have called an addictive oxymoron. The human brain just really can't do it. Given that reality, what are some good ways to manage the digital addiction of meeting participants?
Yeah. Multitasking, to me, is a coping mechanism for a bad meeting. That meeting leaders can actually when you see people scrolling through Instagram,
the meeting's not working.
Exactly. And meeting leaders need to look at multitasking as a form of feedback that they haven't constructed or are facilitating a very effective meeting. And own it. So the best remedy to multitasking is having a really, really compelling meeting that people absolutely won't multitask. Why don't we multitask when we're watching a movie? Because we're drawn in. It's compelling. It's grabbing us. That's what we want to create in meetings. Let's make them compelling. Let's talk about the important stuff. If something can just be an email, make it an email, but design the most compelling experience so no one wants to pick up their phone. They want to learn, listen, and contribute.
Stephen, I can see how you have saved a lot of people millions of hours.
Well, I try. We all try to do our best. And, the thing is about my content is, people are so bad at this and things are in such a bad state that if you leverage this meeting science and even make just 20% of your meetings 20% better, the gains are unbelievable.
Sure. And it's not that complicated to do it, really.
It just requires intentionality and stewardship.
Exactly.
And this idea of being a good steward, I think, is so important for your audience to realize, right? So you want to be a good steward of others' time, right? By being a good steward of others' time, the thought of people leaving your meeting saying it was a waste is so uncomfortable to you that you become intentional and thoughtful.
Yes.
Frankly, it's exactly what you do, Roger. You're a steward of others' time, right? You designed this experience. You so clearly prepared, and therefore I'm all in, right? Because I recognize your stewardship.
Well, I know how much I appreciate people appreciating my time, so I try to reciprocate.
Thank you.
Now, you write about research that shows a so-called silent meeting can be more productive in a brainstorming session than one in which people talk to each other. That somehow seems counterintuitive. Can you give us an example of how and why silence can be beneficial?
Yeah, silence in meetings can be one of the most inclusive things you ever do in a meeting. It's very interesting. And I would never argue that every meeting should be silent, but some could benefit from it. All right. So let me tell you what the research says. Basically, if you compare groups brainstorming in silence, just typing directly into a shared document versus those groups brainstorming with their mouths, groups brainstorming in silence generated nearly twice as many ideas, and those ideas tended to be more creative. So why would that be the case? Well, multiple reasons. First, when there's a silent brainstorming, everyone can talk at once. There's no waiting your turn. Everyone's contributing. That's a real advantage, especially as meeting size increases. Furthermore, in vocal brainstorming sessions, the first thing that someone says inadvertently becomes an anchor, especially if the person sharing it is the leader.
Right.
And next thing you know, people's brainstorming starts to conform around that first idea. Well, given in silent brainstorming, it's a simultaneous generation of ideas. That same confounding factor doesn't emerge.
That's interesting. How common is it for people to try that? What have you seen?
There are definitely organizations trying it. Before Musk took over Twitter, it was actually extremely common for them to do it. They would leverage silent meetings for many of their update meetings. So instead of going around a table, people would type their updates directly into a shared document, and it worked phenomenally well. You know, people would be interacting on these shared documents saying, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you were working on that. Yeah, let's talk about it." And it was so efficient. They would do these update meetings in half as much time, and you have this great documentation. So that was one example. And, but there's others, but in general, Roger, people aren't being very innovative in meetings. They're just doing things out of habit.
When I first heard you talk about silent meetings, I recall that my family and I did this years ago when we had young children. We would have a weekly, what we called family home evening, where we would do various activities. And one time we were talking about the chores around the house and people's assignments, but we decided to sit around a table, and we gave all the children a piece of paper and a pencil. And we said, write down your ideas on how we can make all this work better. And they were writing like crazy. And then they put all the pieces of paper in the middle of the table, and we read them and talked about them. But with hindsight, I realized that was much more effective than having a standard meeting where mom or dad led the meeting and kicked off the ideas.
Yeah, I love that.
Made a world of difference.
It did. And one of the real positives is that obviously in family there's a power dynamic.
Sure.
You know, and your practice helped to bridge that power dynamic so that your children could feel perhaps more safe to contribute.
Yeah.
Good job.
By the way, they're all grown-ups now, and they have no problem speaking up, just so you know.
Beautiful.
Hey there, Leadership listeners. We have something special for you. As a thank you for tuning in, we're offering you a free copy of Roger Dean Duncan's award-winning best-selling book, Change Friendly Leadership. In this book, you'll discover a proven framework for leading change that people will actually buy into, without all the stress and resistance that often stand in the way. You'll also learn powerful strategies to improve relationships both at work and at home, creating a healthier, more productive environment for everyone. To claim your free copy, just head over to changefriendly.com. Don't miss out on this opportunity to transform your good intentions into great performance. Again, grab your free copy of this best-selling book at changefriendly.com.
In your most recent book titled Glad We Met, you focus on the art and science of one-on-one meetings. Your research shows that only about 50% of one-on-ones reach their potential. What factors seem to be missing?
Yeah. Well, first, let's step back and make sure, let me clarify what I mean by a one-on-one meeting.
Okay.
So while our days are filled with one-on-one encounters, what I mean when I say a one-on-one meeting is a meeting between the manager and her or his reports. It is a regular, scheduled meeting. occurs probably weekly or every other week. It is a meeting orchestrated and facilitated by the manager, but, and this is a big but, it's not for the manager. It is a meeting for the direct. It is for the direct to be able to express their needs, their issues, their worries, their questions, and for the manager to offer support and guidance when asked. It is an opportunity for the manager to truly see their people. Now, you could notice something that was missing from my description, which is status updates. That is not what one-on-ones are for. Managers can get status updates any way they want. They've got the power. They can send an email. They can bring it up in a team meeting. They could ask the direct to come into their office at any point and have a status update. These one-on-ones are a dedicated time to put your agenda as a manager to the side and to let your employee just to have a little bit of time where their agenda gets privileged. If they want to share project updates and get feedback, so be it. That's their choice. If they want to ask for feedback about X and Y and managers can offer it, it's their choice. Let them have it. But ultimately, it needs to be a set of dedicated minutes that you're gifting to someone else. And that's a very profound and special thing to do. And when we think about what's missing in today's post-COVID world, it's really meaningful connection and feeling seen. And these one-on-ones can do that. So circling back to your question, why are 50% not working? It's because 50% of the time or more, managers are imposing their agenda. They're not making it a meeting for the employee. They're using it to check up.
Probably what they learned from their manager.
Oh my gosh. And you are so right. And that's like the plague of meetings, that basically people are recycling the dysfunctional practices that they themselves have experienced.
Right. What do you suggest as the right cadence for one-on-ones? In other words, how often should they occur?
Well, the data are pretty strong on it. First of all, if you ask people their preferences, they will say weekly. Mm-hmm. If you look at the data on outcomes, employees who get these things every week or every other week are much more engaged. They're performing better. Teams are better coordinated. So we know that it's basically every week or every other week. And this makes sense, right? When you think about a relationship, you have to have some continuity to it, right?
Sure.
The conversations have to feel natural. And if they're too spread out, they don't feel natural anymore. You have to create that safety. And so you have to have a regular cadence. But here's the good news, Rod. The good news is it's less about the number of minutes and more about the consistency of the minutes. So if you have your one-on-ones for 20 minutes each week and they're good 20 minutes, you can still get the benefits.
This kind of meeting can also be effective with two people where they are equal. Early in our marriage, my wife and I would have a regular, it was informal. We were in the car or having dinner, and I would ask her the stop, start, and continue questions. Anything I've been doing that you'd like for me to stop doing? Is there anything I'm not doing that would be helpful in our relationship that I should start doing? And what are we doing that you think we should continue doing? Mm-hmm. Those were very rich conversations. And, I didn't realize until later that that was a regular one-on-one meeting, if you will.
It was. That's a great thing that you did. And one of the things I also talk about is parents should have these one-on-ones with their kids.
Absolutely. And kids appreciate that focus.
They do. So much of parental communication is do the dishes. Have you finished your homework? Why'd you get a bad grade? They're not rich, meaningful conversations. So finding a dedicated time where you can fully focus on what's on the minds of your children, their agenda, that just builds the relationship.
Exactly. Well, in the workplace, what technology tools have you seen that can be helpful in enhancing the one-on-one meeting experience?
Yeah, there are definitely some systems out there that can help for archiving these things, structuring them. So they exist. And I'm generally agnostic to these tools. obviously I'm pretty unique in this meeting space. So I have a lot of companies reach out, and whether it's Cisco, Microsoft, or Zoom, and they want to talk about my thoughts on new technologies. And I'm totally good with that. But ultimately, what we need to make meetings better is this intentionality and stewardship. It's the human is the bigger problem than the tool itself. And so I often worry that when we give people tools, that they stop thinking they have work to do. And so that's why I remain agnostic to it. It doesn't mean at all that some of these tools and templates can be helpful. They can, but they just don't replace the intentionality.
Of course. Well, speaking of tools, a lot of people are remote workers nowadays.
Yeah.
So what tips can you offer for conducting a one-on-one via Zoom or some other online platform?
Well, interestingly, the research doesn't show that it's problematic. And that employee preference is pretty much equal for Zoom or face-to-face when it comes to one-on-ones. Now, with that said, employees who consistently have virtual one-on-ones, they do occasionally want to have an in-person one-on-one. So that's fine. But they don't mind having the bulk of them virtual. And it goes back to kind of what we said before around the technologies, that the modality matters less than the genuine conforming to what the goal of these are, right? So our podcast, your podcast, is going to work perfectly virtual and it'll work perfectly in person because you're doing a good job. It doesn't matter.
It's all about the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got to have a good relationship. You build the relationship with somebody, and whether you're talking with them over Zoom or FaceTime or face-to-face, the relationship is the key.
That's
trust.
Right. And you're using the word relationship, and I love that. And it's really about caring, right?
Sure.
That you care about the other person. You're genuinely curious. You want to learn. You want to support. And that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, you can't fake it.
Yeah.
Now, you quote Benjamin Franklin as saying, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. How does that apply to participants in one-on-one meetings, and how should you start a one-on-one meeting? Or how should you start having one-on-one meetings with someone with whom you have a new, fresh relationship? How do you kick it off right?
Tying your introduction of one-on-ones to your values is really critical. If you survey leaders and ask them about their values, typically they will share one of their values is about supporting and elevating others. It's a very common value. Now, whether everyone does a good job with it, that's a different question. But most people would say that's their value. So I don't want one-on-ones to ever be seen as a flavor of the month. I want them to be seen as an expression of who you are as a human being, who you are as a leader. So framing it that way, framing it that I want to help you be the best you can be. I recognize my critical role as a leader in doing that. So I want to have these one-on-ones with that spirit. And here's how they're going to look. That helps to set the stage. Now, going back to your Benjamin Franklin quote, in one-on-ones, the preparation in many ways needs to be done by the direct report. When we did some research about the key behaviors of directs to make these things truly work, one of them is being prepared and knowing what you need, right? You can't get what you need unless you know what you need and you express it. So there's some preparation. There's psychological preparation. There's really reflecting on your current slate of activities and come into there with clarity. Because if you're not clear, then the manager's going to jump in with their agenda.
Right. Well, this is another instance where psychological safety is critical.
Yeah.
And when the relationship is fresh, it's very helpful for the leader to go out of his or her way to make sure what the expectations are, and the expectations should revolve around values and open and honest communication.
Yeah.
And then
Well
then good things can happen.
Yeah. And these things need to have momentum. The more momentum there is, then it just gets easier and easier and easier and more natural.
Right. And it's going well when the direct report looks forward to those interactions.
Yeah. Well said.
One final question, Stephen.
Please.
Let's say you're discussing one-on-one meetings with leaders or managers who ask, and I'm sure you've heard this, what's in it for me? What would you tell them?
Oh, so much. So much. As leaders, you're ultimately evaluated on the success or lack thereof of the people who report into you. Thus, given that one-on-ones elevate the success of your people, they're really an investment in your own brand. Furthermore, think about how long it takes to replace employees. Regular one-on-ones creates greater retention because employees feel more connected and more engaged on the job. So you save that time. And then there's an unexpected finding that emerged. We actually found that managers who do regular one-on-ones reported feeling like they had more time. And when I asked why, they typically said is that when they had these regular one-on-ones, employees would not interrupt them throughout the week because they know they would have your ear later. And the fact that these managers had more uninterrupted time helped them save time. And I guess the last thing I'll just share on this is by having these regular one-on-ones, you're able to better coordinate the activities of the entire team. Thus, that helps prevent some rework. And finally, let's not forget the expression that people don't leave bad jobs,
right?
Leave bad managers. So one-on-ones are your opportunity to prove that you're not a bad manager.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. You have provided a truckload of ideas to help our listeners improve the quality and maybe even reduce the quantity of their meetings. I can only imagine the energy you have unleashed. We so appreciate your being with us. To learn more about Stephen and his work, go to StephenRogelberg.com. That's Stephen, Steven, Rogelberg, Rogelberg.com. And to grab a free copy of my book, Change Friendly Leadership, go to changefriendly.com. That's changefriendly.com. In other episodes of Leadership, I'm sharing my exclusive conversations with many more top thought leaders who offer smart tips to boost your effectiveness in both your professional and personal life. Our guest list includes superstars like Stephen M.R. Covey, Liz Wiseman, Doug Conant, Heather Younger, Marshall Goldsmith, Bill George, Jessica Chin, Guy Kawasaki, and many others who have insightful things to say that you can put to good use immediately. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay informed on what's coming your way. Trust me, you don't want to miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.